Ladies and gentlemen,
Hello.
we are back.
We are back.
Once again,
Here we are.
back with a brand new
Episode.
of...
It's a chill thing.
Oh, man. You know, we like to start out with a little humor, but this is a very serious episode.
Yeah.
This week, we're getting serious.
We're getting serious here.
More serious than ever before.
So serious.
So serious, it may be hard to watch.
It's really serious.
So serious. Okay, but no, for real. So this week we're going to be talking about something pretty interesting for both of us. It was recommended by our boys, Saya and Tim. Shout out to both of y'all. Love
Shout
you.
out the boys.
Shout out the boys. And it's basically going to be about upbringing and the idea of breaking the cycle, which is not necessarily like a, oh, you know, fuck my parents, like I'm not going to be like them kind of thing.
Yeah.
It could be if your parents are shitty enough,
if
right?
it's like to that extent,
right?
I'm
But
sure.
I think, at least for me and Tyler, our experiences, and I don't want to speak for you too much, but like,
yeah, but
I know that
we've talked about it a lot.
right.
So.
I think for us, it's been more like not so much breaking the cycle, but just creating our own,
Independent beings.
Yes. That's a
Like
pretty good way of putting it.
Like, we come from a family, but becoming our own independent.
Yes, our own individuals, our own people,
yes.
right? And I think that's for a lot of people I've talked to in my life, it's been a pretty hot topic of like, a lot of people feeling like they can't outrun their childhood or just the past, in general, their upbringing. And when we say upbringing, it's more like, anything from 0 to, even past 18, to be honest, because I know, especially people in our generation and nowadays a lot more people are living with their parents, me included, so same with Tyler. So like that's something that I think is kind of interesting, is that you're still being, I guess it depends to some extent, like how much of a relationship you have with your parents and like what they do, like past a certain point, right? Because there's quite a few parents, I think, who not after you're 18, it's not like 18th birthday, okay, we're done parenting.
Get the fuck out.
Get the fuck out. No. Well, some parents will do that if they're crazy enough, right? But like, I think from what I've noticed, it's more like, a lot of the parenting and a lot of the teaching your child how to do certain things happens between 0 to 18 and maybe a little bit past that, right? Especially because there's a lot of formative years, obviously, when you're very young, especially when you're a baby. I think we know from just what we know about psychology and some scientific stuff that those years are extremely important in the way of how you end up being as a person, personality wise, and a lot of the little subtleties in the way that
and the way you view life. A lot of it comes from that time frame.
Absolutely. So these are all very important things. There's like a million different avenues you can kind of look at this topic from. But I think me and Tyler want to kind of keep it within our scope of our experience and not generalize too much about other people's experiences and all this shit.
Because we can't speak for everyone else, but we can definitely speak for our own.
Well, right, and I think that's true for every subject, but especially this one, because man, I've talked to so many people in my life who, I've gotten along with. I find it quite easy to get along with people from any upbringing, any background, just as a personal thing. But I've noticed that the little subtleties in the way that we view life, the way that we talk, the way that we act, the way that we do things are heavily influenced by our upbringing. And this is a very big generational issue, I feel. Like I've worked with a lot of older people in the past, especially as of the past 3 or 4 years, and it's quite a different experience kind of communicating with them and learning about them and the way that they were brought up versus the way that we were brought up, right? I actually was going to bring this up to you a few days ago when I mentioned it. I work in a cancer clinic, and one of our patients was talking about this sort of thing and how there's like a cliche stereotype of like, oh, like younger generations aren't grateful, like they're so spoiled, blah blah blah.
Yeah, we have it easy.
Yeah,
back in my day, it was like
literally
this.
The most generic cliche thing you can think of, right? And one of our patients was kind of going on about that, and normally I think it's very easy to hear someone be saying that, especially if you're within our generation and a bit younger. You hear someone saying that, and you're like, okay, fucking boomer, like whatever, like. But it's like really
initial response to that.
Yeah, and like I get that, and I've responded like that many times in the past. But I think it takes a lot again to actually hear someone out and be like, "Why do you think that? What is the reasoning that you generalize and stereotype that way in your mind?" Because there is reasons,
right? There's always going to be a reason.
And to me, it seems like it's more of a problem of people looking at others' experiences strictly through the lens of their own experience and not outside of that, right? So when you do that, you are tunnel vision, right?
Yeah,
like you can't.
I suppose you kind of get
You completely are tunnel vision, and you can't really understand why people act in this way or that way, and it can be almost dehumanizing to an extent, right?
Yeah, and I think tunnel vision is like a good way to explain it, but like it's also kind of like egocentric, right? Because you're not able to like take yourself out of your own experience and put yourself in someone else's shoes.
Well, yeah, that's the basic thing, like put yourself in someone else's shoes, right?
Yeah.
We've all heard that growing up, but it's funny because I've met a lot of older people who claim to be very empathetic, very nice, sweet people, and they are. Like, you interact with them normally.
Surface level.
It's a surface level thing. It's like, oh yeah, you could be so nice to people and blah blah blah, but like when it really comes down to it, on a deeper level, you don't show that empathy. When a situation arises where you have to directly see that someone is different than you and try and understand that and show empathy for that. That's where you trip.
I think
and
that's
fall,
like where it like really counts the most too. It's like when your like ideals, or so to say, whatever you want to call it, like gets challenged. Like, can you still keep that same?
Right.
I'm a nice person. I respect people's views and whatever.
Right, and it's so funny to me because we have a lot of opinions that are quite controversial. Like so many young people are just like they have abortions and blah blah blah. Like that's a very like ridiculous example, right? But like it's like, or like let's say this, like young people are just having sex and blah blah blah, like they don't care, like, or another. I'm just thinking of stereotypical things that I've heard some older people say in my life.
Like too carefree. They don't know what work is. They don't know they don't know how to make a living for themselves.
That was a lot of what
they need to grow up. Yeah.
I've heard that quite a lot from many people. And it's, I don't know, I truly believe, like, from my standpoint now, it's like, I could care less what these people say, because I know what the reality of my experience is.
Yeah, especially now being like 23 and not like, 18 being told these things, and you're like, well, like, fuck you, man. Like,
there's more of like an angstiness when you're a bit younger, to where you're like, fuck you guys, you don't understand, like, you
don't get it.
And it's stupid because I guess to a large extent they do understand, but they were born into a different world and experienced a completely different world and a unique set of experiences than you did and everyone did, right? So the uniqueness of being human is not within like I was, I've went through so many things and life was so hard and trials and tribulations and I'm just a really strong person. Like, okay, cool. Like you can say that and like that's respectable, but like so has nearly millions and billions of other people. Like you're not special for going through shit, you know? And I think that's where a lot of the dissonance comes from older generations sometimes, is like they look down on younger generations, like, oh, like life is so easy for them. Like it's so like they're just so
live during the Great Depression. What do they know? Like
this is one of the most this bothers me a lot because it's a basic like misunderstanding of what I thought parents wanted for their kids. You know, because you hear this cliche thing of like, oh, like parents just want the best for you. Parents just want better for you than they had, and blah 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 blah.
Right.
But it's like when it really comes down to it, on a human level, even it doesn't even have to be between family members. It could be like, when you look at younger generations, if you're an older person and you look at younger generations and you have this broad generalized thing of, oh, they're just so spoiled, they're so this, like life is so much easier for them. Let's be real for a second too. Life is not much easier than it was decades and decades ago in certain areas, right? Like we still have, I was
gonna say, like, there's a lot of like
technologically and I guess in a lot of structural ways, sure, but like, you know, we still have crippling student loan debt. We still have immense wealth inequality. We have the inability to, you know, be financially independent due to a lot of these circumstances. And let's not even get into the mental health stuff that has plagued us. I mean, we're living through a pandemic right now. Did they have to do that? Like, what the fuck? You know, it's all these things that, you know, and we could play a suffering Olympics all day, right?
Right. Yeah, it's just a big piss party.
Like, I hate that.
Yeah.
There's no point in doing that, right?
Yeah.
Whether you're 60, whether you're 20, we've all been through shit. We've all felt
there's
pain.
Something that's happened throughout your lifetime and someone else's lifetime, regardless of age. Everyone's been through some kind of something.
You're not any better than anyone else for what you've gone through.
Yeah.
Period.
I agree.
You're not. You're not. You as a human being are not on any higher of a level of importance or anything.
No.
Just because you've gone through something that's difficult more than someone else has.
No, I think it only kind of gives you those like unique aspects of like how you came to be who you are. You know, all those events can kind of like shape you into a person necessarily, but it doesn't mean like oh, like I've been through all of this compared to this guy who hasn't been through what I went through, so you know, I'm more of a man or more of a, you know, fighter, like, you know, like
that's
whatever
when you
want to fucking call it. Like,
you start to create an identity around your past, right? And that's never healthy for anyone, but it's especially not healthy when you do it on such a long-term scale and then make someone feel less than because of that identity that you've created and this whole ego. You know, like, it's absurd. It truly is absurd. And I've talked to I've had conversations with older people about this, right? And even among people who are millennials, like late millennials, right? Like they're on the cusp of being not a millennial, you know what I mean? I've talked to some people who have a bit of a understanding of both sides to some extent, right? And I feel like we do too because of our age.
Right.
We grew up like half within technology and half without technology to some extent.
Just barely, right?
Just barely, not even half.
In 97, like, I mean, I don't fucking know. Like, I was a toddler. I don't know exactly what, but yeah, like.
Well, right. I remember
like barely introduced. I remember like growing up with just like the internet and like it's like very early stages.
I was playing like a few computer games growing up, but like that was it. I wasn't like social media wasn't a thing until we had
like TV shows and like VHS tapes and
we were like right after MySpace is when we started getting into social media.
Would that be? Yeah, because like after MySpace was like
not like when it started, but like after it was starting to lose popularity and Facebook came about. You know?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess like I mean Facebook. I mean when started Facebook like
I don't even want to guess.
5th grade, 6th grade.
I don't know. I mean, bro, that's a whole nother can of worms. Yeah. I just think it's really interesting to think about this discrepancy of like understanding each other's suffering, right? Because like I'm not gonna sit here and claim that I know how it feels to grow up in the times that a lot of older people grew up in. There were a lot of hardships that I'm sure they went through.
Very different life that they, you know.
Right, but I understand that. It's just to whatever extent I can, right? I don't directly understand it, but I have empathy for it, and I, you know, or I would say maybe sympathy would be more accurate of a word to use there, but I get it, right? Life is hard. Life is always going to be hard. But at the same time, on a human level, don't you want younger generations to have an easier life? Why is there such a view of, and maybe part of this view is maybe partially, you know, what I experienced and like what people said, but also what I've internalized throughout my life. But I do feel this sense, and I'm sure people will relate, that, you know, there's like a expectation that you need to work super hard and, you know, do all this stuff and really just grind through life and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And it's like, does life have to be this hard? Is it supposed to be? Right? Like, why? Who made that up? Yeah. Right? Like, that seems like stupid.
If I just work super hard, is that going to make life easier?
Is that going to make me happy?
Yeah.
No. Like, what? If you're trying to like just get things out of life, if you're trying to just one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. Where's the end, right?
Yeah.
Like when's the point
where's
where
the end game? Like,
when are you at peace with what you have? When do you accept everything that is and just be like, okay, I'm fine with this.
Right.
And I think also in a more specific way, like I think that the view needs to become, as time goes on more and more and we evolve, it needs to become more, how can we make life easier for everyone and equally easier, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's a ginormous gap in, especially when you look at classes of wealth and just hierarchical, the way that human society looks. Mm-hmm. There's a huge gap in the quality of life for so many people.
Most definitely.
And it's a shame, right? And this goes into some political stuff, which we'll probably do another episode, but I think when we're talking about upbringing and all these things, I think it's just really curious to me that there's a expectation from a lot of older generations towards younger generations that life should be hard and you should enjoy that. You should be proud about that. Yeah. You should just...
You got to take the punches and you got to, just work your butt off.
Right.
And...
I mean, let's be real too.
There's some real...
There is some truth to that.
Yeah, some truth
don't get
to
me
that.
Wrong,
like, of course, like you have to work to earn a living. You have to do some certain things to ensure that you can have a life in the first place. But like,
even if everything on a structural level was set up in a way where you are comfortable and you had money and you had a house and you had food and all this stuff laid out for you and you were able to do with whatever you wanted with it without having to slave away at a job and whatever. Even if that was the case, you're still going to have moments of pain and struggles in your life to some extent. But I think the emphasis needs to go more towards creating a foundational level of like, life should be easy, simple, not in the more practical way, right? Like in terms of working, in terms of just the expectations of the way you should live your life, you know? It should not be struggle. It should be finding peace within yourself, finding joy within yourself, having the emphasis be more on the internal, journey rather than the external journey.
The external stuff that doesn't necessarily last.
Right. And just going down the checklist. What's next?
Right.
What's next? What's next?
So go get a car. Okay. Get a house. Okay. So
all right. Still not happy.
Big TV screen. Okay.
Still miserable. Yeah. Severely depressed. And I think that's where a lot of the dissonance comes too with younger generations and older generations is a lot of people from older generations don't understand at all and they don't try to understand. They just hear, I'm struggling with my sexual identity. I'm struggling with depression. I'm struggling with anxiety. And these were things that were not talked about nearly as much.
We didn't have time for mental health.
Like what the fuck? What did you have time for then? Suffering? Just being miserable?
It's like mental health wasn't an issue when we were younger. Well, it's like because you didn't fucking realize it.
And
because it wasn't as prevalent.
No.
You didn't hear about it as much.
It was there. It just wasn't talked about.
It wasn't talked about.
It was a hidden thing, man. It was like a secret. And I've talked to a lot of older adults, older people who, have dealt with mental health issues and they acknowledge it. But there's still many people I know who clearly have mental health issues, but will not admit it. Yeah. And will never admit
everything's just fine and dandy.
Because
I'm okay.
And when you spend long enough creating and practicing these habitual, thought patterns and creating this whole foundation of I am solid, I am good, I am a good person, I am this way and I can't be anything else. So, and then when you experience something that is awful, like depression, anxiety, and all of these issues that can arise throughout your life, you just shove it down, and shove it all down.
You're
and
just sweeping it under a rug.
Sweep it under the rug. And then when you raise a child that way, what is that doing? Right?
Exactly, yeah. And I think this finally kind of starts to get into, like, the upbringing part of it. Because, like, it's great that that's a way that, people have made it through life. Like, oh yeah, like I had all these issues and I didn't know what to do, but I've managed to keep them contained in this bottle, and the top hasn't really popped off yet and all, but like that's great. Like
that's cool, man. Great.
That's cool. Like that's a really great way, right? But like like Joy was just saying, like you start passing that down to like your kids then, like, and you're like, yeah, this is the way like you're supposed to be living, like. Like how's that really going to affect them, like from like birth then, right? Like you being raised in a way that's like, yeah, like, you know, shit's gonna be hard. Life is gonna be hard for you.
Right.
It's like you just grow up thinking that life is fucking tough. Then, like,
I think the thing that happens a lot is parents emphasize the external struggle rather than the internal struggle.
Yeah.
They say, oh, you're gonna go through this thing and this thing and this thing, like, oh, you're gonna be in relationships that are gonna be awful.
You're gonna get your heart broken.
You're gonna fail at school. You're gonna
you might not get the job.
Right. You might not get the job. You might, you know, not have money, whatever. Because like they all experience those things, you know, maybe at some point. And they focus on that, but then it's like, okay, if I experience those things, what's going to happen internally and how do I deal with that? And that's where a lot of the disconnect comes with younger and older generations, is because they didn't do that internal work. They never did, and they still aren't, you know? So
because they don't know how. I think is like the biggest reason. And it's the same thing. It's passed down from their parents in a way, and right? So, because how else do you learn to deal with things?
Exactly. You can't look at them like, oh, what the fuck, you guys are so I mean, they are ignorant, right? They are, but it's ignorant. Not like, you know, you look at them negatively like these guys are just ignorant fucks. We're all ignorant to some extent, right? We can't, I mean, there is a way to be aware of your experience within a lot of different areas of your life, but on a macro scale, everyone is ignorant to some extent, and you have to be compassionate towards that, like you said, because they were taught that, right? And it's just a handing down of ignorance, right?
Right. Yeah.
Over and over again.
It's like, hey, this is the best I could do. Like,
right. And I think that's more of the issue rather than handing down things that are inherently bad. Although that's also an issue too.
Yeah, well, of course, yeah.
You know,
we can get into that a little bit.
Because I think there's a lot of different parenting styles too, right? Like you have parents that are more involved with their kids' life, more trying to control in a healthy and unhealthy way, right? There's parents who...
Well, yeah, I think there's like extremes to like both sides. You know, like on one side you can get like complete helicopter parents that are like way too involved in the kid's life and like on top of every little thing and like, you know, not giving them space to breathe and like become their own individual person. And then you get the other side of the spectrum where it's like just complete neglect and it's like they don't give a fuck about their kid.
They're both very bad places to be, right? Like you don't want to be either of those kinds of parents. And I've met a lot of people and talked to a lot of people who have had both extremes and all in between, and it's a huge mixture of shit. I mean, the bottom line is no parent that I've ever met has been perfect, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
And I think that's another thing too, is that a lot of parents and a lot of people from older generations have trouble being self-aware enough to admit their own faults and weaknesses, right?
Yes. Yeah, most definitely.
And this is a human issue though. Like this isn't just a older generation or younger generation issue. Like this is something that everyone needs to be more conscious of.
Yeah.
Because if you can't be honest with yourself about the things that are plaguing your experience, then how are you going to change them or fix them, right? And that, when you're not aware of it within even your own experience, your own personal experience on a individual level, what is it going to look like when you start to have kids and you still aren't aware enough?
Yeah.
Right? So you're teaching that lack of awareness.
Yeah, like right? what are you showing them then at that
right.
point? Like what are you actually like showing them and teaching them and whatever, right?
The showing is the really important part, right? Because
you're showing them to take their emotions and bottle it up. You're showing them to just sweep it under the rug,
right? Or just you're not teaching them anything, and they're just like, oh, what do I do?
Yeah, right. Like I'm feeling all these things. Like I don't even know what to do with it. Like,
and that's something that happens too. Is parents don't teach their kids how to deal with certain things that come up, and they have to learn in other ways. And sometimes the ways that they learn
aren't proper ways.
Are very wrong.
Yeah.
You know,
like they turn to drugs. Like you know, parents might not have been know drug users, but maybe they had a friend who had a somewhat similar upbringing. And it's like, hey, like let's go smoke some meth. And you're like, okay, yeah, let's go do some meth. I'm feeling kind of weird. Like,
right. Well, and again, that's just it's a lack of guidance. It's a lack of knowing what to do when these things occur in life, you know, because these are constants. These are things that occur for everyone, right?
Yeah.
These struggles. So. I don't think anyone's just going through life completely blissfully from the get-go.
No.
Even if you had the most perfect parents, you had the most perfect, lovely upbringing on paper, You know, it's not gonna
things are gonna happen that make that big like rainbow, you know,
just crush. It's just gonna crash. Your house of cards is gonna just fall.
It's just gonna crumble
eventually. And so when that house falls, what are you gonna do? You know.
Yeah.
And what did you learn to do? Right? Because if you're taught to avoid, if you're taught to be averse to these things, you're gonna do that over and over again and practice that for most of your life, and then you're going to be at a certain point later in life and be like, why am I like this?
Yeah.
And that's, again, it's where it comes like breaking the cycle of people are like, what the fuck do I do? They're like, and I get it, you know, I've been there. I'm like, what is this? Like, what am I doing? Like, is this how life is supposed to be? And it's really sad because I think a lot of people are just lost and hopeless. You know, that's a lot of the feeling that I've gotten from talking with people is that they just don't know what to do. They don't know what to do with their anxiety. They don't.
Life is like standing still for them.
Yeah, it's stagnant completely, and that is also dependent on some external factors too, like the jobs that they have, and you know. But I think it's less about the external thing is not the source. It's the internal struggle and the inability to know what to do with that, and so it makes the external things feel like those are the problem.
Right. Yeah. Even though it's something that you got to work on. Like
you could. I mean, dude, I've talked to so many people who are like, "Oh, I love my job. You know, this is fine, but I'm just so depressed and anxious."
Yeah. Like it's not the job that makes you happy.
It's not, man. Right. It's not any circumstance that makes you happy. You know, it's really not. And I think that's a huge point to be made. But I think it's just tough because, again, I think a lot of people I've met, they just did not have the upbringing was maybe like, here's another thing is like on paper, upbringings can look totally fine, right? Like you're just like, you know, you're chilling. You know, I love my parents.
Yes.
They're great. That's another thing we want to make a point on too is like, when it comes to talking about upbringing, you don't want to, hating your upbringing and hating your parents and hating everything that's happened to you is not going to change what you're experiencing now. You know, holding on to those grudges, holding on to all that pain, holding on to all that misery, not going to do anything for you, right? And I understand these things are heavy. You know, like there's some serious trauma and fucked up shit that people have gone through in their childhood. And I feel fairly lucky to have experienced the upbringing I have because I didn't go through anything too awful compared to some other people. But that doesn't make it any easier for me per se, because I still have to work within my own experience and deal with my own struggles.
Absolutely.
But maybe not on the same level as some others.
Yeah.
But again, this is another thing that people do. They will create an identity around their upbringing that they got from their parents. So it's like, again, the cyclical nature of it is your parents did that with their upbringing, and now you're doing it with your upbringing from them. You know, so it's like gets passed on and on and on and on and on.
Yeah, it's kind of funny though, because like I mean, the way that like I view like parenting, I guess in a sense, I've never been a parent, obviously, right? I would like to be one day, I think. But like the way I kind of view it is like, you know, I want to be able to leave like my kids, if I have any, with like a better life than what I had and like a better understanding. So you know, instead of like passing them on, like starting them off on the foot of like the cycle of it all, right? Like I want to start them off with like an idea of like, yeah, be your own independent person, a fresh slate, right? Like this is what I'm gonna teach you, but like you're totally welcome to like become your whole individual self, like. And
that's that's very important, man. I think a lot of parents have made the mistake of making their kids feel like they need to live life in this predetermined way, in the way that they taught their kids to, and nothing else, right?
Well, yeah, I think too, like a lot of parents kind of like have their kids and almost like live like vicariously like through their kids then, because they're like, like you know, this is my son Tommy, and and you know, he's playing sports now. I remember when I played baseball, like, oh yeah, let's go Tommy, you know, and that's great and all. Like it's cool to like if you played baseball growing up and you want your son playing baseball, like cool, but
you can
like
derive some pleasure from that.
That's fine. And that's cool. But like it's like you know, you don't want your kids to literally turn out like you.
That'd be boring, right?
Like that'd be kind of weird.
That'd be boring and weird and not fun.
Like
I think it's when you start out with a basic lacking in your life, and you know, you're like, oh shit, like I feel this, like this is wrong in my life, and I'm like, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna have kids, right? Let me raise some kids with this lacking, you know.
What I'm lacking is kids. That's the whole.
Right.
I just need a couple babies. Like.
Nah, see, that ain't gonna solve jack. And I don't think a lot of people are intentionally like, oh, like I'm gonna have kids because they're gonna make me happy. You know, they don't literally think that, but subconsciously, you are doing that. Even if you tell yourself that you're doing it because, oh, you wanna raise a good generation.
My life feels incomplete right now.
That
is whatever. Like
the problem is people lying to themselves about their intentions, right, and not realizing what is going on subconsciously, right? And that's a shame because again, it creates a whole generation that are going to be inclined to do the same fucking thing. It's a shame
and it's a sham.
Shame without the E. Sham wow. Oh my god. But yeah, man, I don't know. It's just I think the compulsion too is really important. Like I think there's a compulsory nature to like parents wanting to live vicariously through their kid's life. They're like, I need to feel something, right? I need to, because
their life has become stagnant at that point, right? Because they're like, oh, like having kids can possibly make life a little interesting,
and
like,
even after you have kids, this can happen at any point,
right? Yeah, but I'm like you raise your kid, and then like say your kids aren't like interacting with you as much, and you're like, oh,
yeah, when they go to become a teenager,
what do I do now? Like,
yeah, that was
it's
tough.
like your identity as a mom or dad has been like crushed, and it's like, who am I now? Like,
that's a tough one. I remember experiencing that growing up too. Is like feeling like I felt guilty for the way that I was acting as a teenager because my parents were like. They felt disconnected.
Yeah, they're like, oh, we don't see you as much anymore.
Like, just like you know, you're a teenager, like you're mean to us and blah blah blah, and like, I mean, they were right about that stuff to a large extent. I was a little fuckhead when I was a teenager. But I mean, at the same time, this is a constant among most teenagers, right? Like, there's when someone goes from being a kid to being a teenager, it's a huge leap in like. The way that you experience life, you know?
Right. Well, I mean, to go cliche here, I mean, after a certain point, it becomes like a struggle of like finding who you are, right? And like you
start to question that a little bit,
right? And you're like living at home, like you see your family constantly, and you're kind of like hitting a state of like, man, like is this like who I am? Am I just supposed to be like within here? Like what else is there? And you like start, you know, that's kind of like the angsty shit, right? It's like.
It's like an identity crisis.
Yeah,
man.
yeah, kind of is. It's
your first identity crisis.
Yeah,
becoming a teenager.
You know, you get the first one, you get the midlife, you get.
Well, I think this is. I don't know. I think there is a way to avoid this from happening, but it would take a very smart, aware parent to be able to handle that in a proper way,
like a productive way.
And I think being able to explain to your kid that you do not have to be anything. You are not anything. Right? Like, you do not have to fit into any box or be anything. Yeah. Just be a fucking kid and enjoy it. Yeah. You don't have to figure shit out right now. Not even later in life either, to be honest. Because the idea of figuring out, what the fuck does that mean? You know?
Yeah. What are we talking about? What are you talking about, like trying to figure out life?
Trying to figure out who you are. Trying to figure out, what am I doing? What is the point of all this, right? That's a process, man. Like, that is
I mean, it's ongoing.
It's an ongoing thing.
I don't even know if like, you know, it would be ideal, you know, say you haven't figured it out and you're on your deathbed and all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, this is who I am, right? But like,
there's no set answer.
Yeah, there's no like set time frame of when you're gonna like discover it. You know,
I don't think there. For me, it was not like a discovery of that. It was more so just a realizing that I didn't need to seek anything, right? Yeah. There's nothing to seek outside myself, right? So being content with just the joy of being, right? Just being content with the peace that you've confined within yourself, right? I think that's really a big part of it. But how do you learn that, right? How do you fucking learn that? You don't learn that if you don't learn that.
You don't learn that if you're being taught to bottle everything up.
If you learn the opposite, you definitely are not going to learn that, you know? And that's, when you have a direct opposition to a certain way of living, it creates like a huge struggle, right? And you see other people living a certain way and you're like, what the fuck? Like, what are they doing that I'm not? Like, what's wrong with me? Like,
well, yeah, I mean, like when you're younger, say you didn't have like a you know, I mean, I guess should we maybe like kind of get into like our upbringings then at a certain point?
Yeah, we could do that now.
Yeah. Okay. So like, I mean, I'll kind of get into mine a little bit. Sure. Like, I mean, my family grew up in a somewhat wealthy neighborhood, like surrounded by like wealthier neighborhoods as well, and like, you know, my family wasn't a wealthy family, and we had, you know, some financial issues and have had financial issues growing up and everything. So like, you know, you kind of growing up in that environment, you see a lot of other families with money, you see a lot of other families not having those same struggles, and you kind of just like wonder like, wow, like my life isn't as great because I don't have like a PlayStation, I don't have an Xbox, whatever. You like kind of get yourself in these like mindsets of like wanting these like material things because, you know, your friends have them, you know. You go to school and your friends have the sickest light up sneakers you've ever seen, but you got the non-light up, you know, fucking stupid shit, like and it's kind of weird like looking at that, right, like growing up in that situation. And that was something that I kind of struggled with for a bit, like trying to like understand why these other families could have these things and like why my family like didn't necessarily. But like as you know, as you grow up, you start to understand a bit more, and like I feel like I would say like around like 13 years old, I kind of just had that like realization that like, hey, like this is the way my family is. Like I can't change that necessarily. And it's just like accepting it. It's like, yeah, it's like this is how it's going to be. And, you know, I learned that, you know, hand-me-downs are cool. Like I don't need to hate hand-me-downs. Like, you know, it's just clothes at the end of the day. It doesn't mean anything. Doesn't bring me a higher status or anything like that. You know, and that's something that my parents kind of like instilled with me, right? It's like, you know, we all knew that finances weren't all that great, but like my parents still wanted to get me nice things and, you know, teach me things like that. And so that was something that I learned, like, you know, to kind of let go of like the material possession type of things, right? Like,
it's a good lesson, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you know, and I don't know, just like going up throughout school, you know, and then you get to high school and stuff too. It's like, you know, everyone's got like nice cars and stuff, and I'm
growing up in fucking Palatine.
Yeah, that's exactly how. Yeah, you know, I'm rolling up to school with like a Pontiac with a busted up bumper with some duct tape on it and shit, and people are rolling into school with a fucking BMW or like a fucking yeah. Right, so it's just it's like totally different, and so, you know, I think a lot of like the values and stuff that I got growing up was like taught to me from my parents, in that sense of like not necessarily needing these like materialistic things. And I think that's kind of helped me like focus more inwards on stuff. And, you know, and we were kind of talking about like the angsty like teenager years and stuff, and like my experience with that is definitely like similar to Joey's. Like, you know, I wasn't always like a super nice kid necessarily to my parents, and like there's definitely times where like, you know, I wanted to like spend the night at a friend's house or something, and they gave me the answer of no, and I sat there and argued with them for like hours until they just were like fed up, and I was like, okay, like I'm going, like you know, see you later. You know, but like it was tough for me because like living at home for like all that time, and like living with my family, and like I share a room with my brother and like still do now, and like it was really hard for me to find my like independence from my family, right?
The feeling of independence, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so like I think a lot of the issues that I had when I was younger was like revolved around that. And so like thankfully like my parents, you know, like instilled in me a couple ideals, like, you know, like I don't need the outside materialistic things to be happy. And, you know, I became good friends with Joey at a certain point too, and like I spent a lot of time at his house, and like, you know, I was able to like eventually start finding like a peace of mind of like, I don't know, like this is kind of, you know, we like start developing like the values and stuff of like our own individual things, because we start like philosophizing. Like philosophizing. We're like, if that's even a word, right? Like, I love that word. I know, but like we fucking like sit there and just like talk and like talk about our experiences and all this stuff, and you know, not everything is like great with like my parents. Like we don't always have like the cleanest house, and like we can get lazy and like late on payments and like late to practices and all these things. And there's stuff that like, you know, I see like that, and I'm like, I don't want to follow in those footsteps, because those aren't necessarily like good footsteps to follow, and you don't want to pick up those bad habits and stuff necessarily. And so that's always been a battle for me too, like trying to work on tardiness, like even in college, like getting to classes on time, waking up on time, like fucking doing my homework and shit, like all that. It's a whole process of like trying to piece together like what you've learned from your parents, and like piece together and like weave it in with like what you've learned throughout your experience of your own life, and trying to like intermingle it all, and like it becomes like a war zone of like figuring out like what you're trying to accept. War zone of ideas. Yeah, like what you're trying to accept, and like all this shit, like and like I was gonna talk about it, but totally skipped over. But like as a kid, like in that like angsty type of period, right? Like I tried to get out of the house a lot because I didn't want to be home, and so like my parents are always good parents and all, but they're always like asking me like where I am, like what I'm doing, like checking up on me, and they're like if I'm out for like a weekend, they like tell me that they miss me and stuff, which is super sweet, and I love that, right? Like it's nice, but like at the same time it's like like I'm just gone for like 2 days, like like I love you guys too, but like I've been out of, I haven't been gone that long. I got
my own life to live. Shit.
Right, like I got shit going on. It's like it's like a lot of stuff like that too, to like kind of struggles now, like being 23 years old, like living at home, and like there's still some times where like
that'll pop up.
Like last weekend, like my mom texted me like, oh, like when are you gonna be home? Like, oh, like within the next couple hours. She's like, okay, like I just miss you, and I'm like, I miss you too, but like I'm fucking
it just creates like a weird
doing
pressure.
my own thing. It's like I almost feel like I let them down sometimes, of like not being home enough, or like not spending enough time with them, when like I've spent 20 years of my fucking life.
That's a long time.
23 years of my life, right? Like,
and I put in a couple decades with my parents.
Yeah, goddamn.
It's a long fucking time.
Yeah.
And I think you brought up a lot of good stuff, man. I think it's just weird because, like we were saying before, it's like there's this weird feeling of like, feeling like sometimes your parents are trying to live vicariously through your life and depend on your happiness and your sadness and all these different things, and they fluctuate with that. And it's like it creates this pressure on a child. It creates so much pressure to like live a certain way and to be a certain thing and to act a certain way. Yeah. And it's like, I don't know, man. Like, I'm not saying just don't give a fuck at all, but like, I would definitely encourage children to be free, Yeah. To an extent, as long as they're safe, as long as they're not doing anything wild as fuck.
I think another good example of that is like, like I was raised Catholic and going to church when I was younger and stuff, and we don't go to church all that much anymore. But like, in high school, I started questioning like why I was even like doing this, because like at the time I like believed in God, and like but like I like started thinking about it. I'm like, why do I even like believe in God?
Which is what we do as we grow up, because we're like, I mean, a lot of people do that, I think.
Yeah, because I mean, I like and the only reason I could think of is like, well, because my parents kind of tell me to, and like because my pastor kind of tells me to, like
the level of how much your parents really made this a thing that you need to follow, right?
Yeah, right. And so it's like like we pray at dinner tables and we do stuff like that, and I'm cool with all that, but like now at this time, like I've like pulled away from religion necessarily, and like I'm kind of figuring out my own thing, and like there's a whole aspect of like having to tell my parents that, and I wasn't just like yo, mom and dad, like I'm not Catholic anymore, like fuck your views and shit, right? Yeah, but it's like like it was weird, because it's like I felt like in a way like I was letting them down by like telling them that like I'm not following the Catholic religion anymore.
That's another thing too, is like half of that feeling is like something that came from them, and half of it is something you created yourself, right? Because that feeling and thought would not have arisen without your ability to conjure that up, right?
Right, exactly.
So that's partly your fault in a sense, right? But at the same time, it's totally valid, because that pressure created the likelihood of that thing happening. Right.
Exactly.
So it makes sense. I don't know, dude. It's so funny to me too, because on paper we have had fairly different upbringings, and it's so funny because like, but with all these different upbringings, you know, like, and I'll get into mine too, but I think a lot of the times, no matter your upbringing, and this goes into like the whole nature versus nurture argument too, like no matter how much you can be indoctrinated to think a certain way, and sometimes it's not as serious as indoctrination, but like, I mean, fuck, you've heard stories of like people from like what was that one like super hardcore church that was like, you know, super homophobic and awful, like people that were like brought up extremely
yeah,
like,
I don't know if I could like pinpoint to like one church, but like it's like,
there is one
like
church
a lot
I'm thinking of
there's
though.
like a I think you've like showed me videos of like
Westboro Baptist Church.
Yeah.
Westboro Baptist Church.
Yes. Yeah, I remember that shit. That shit's
insane.
crazy.
Absolutely insane. And so, I mean, look it up on YouTube. There's some crazy documentaries and stuff about it. But basically, extremely fucked up, like religious fundamentalists, like awful shit, like against homophobes. They're fucking protesting like veterans, like funerals and shit, like awful. Like, and so I've heard stories of people who were within that church defecting after 10, 20 years, you know, like being raised up in that church and then completely going off the grid at later in life, you know, and like that's like the most extreme version of, you know, being raised a certain way, right? And for that person to be able to change and go in a completely different direction, that makes me think anyone can change,
dude.
Right?
Like, I mean, like being born into like an extremist like
that is
church like that, extreme. Right? Like, and then being able to one day like wake up and be like, this shit don't make sense. Right. Like, I don't like.
It's
what
probably
the fuck
more
am
of
I
a
doing?
process when it's that extreme too.
Well,
though,
yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
Like,
you know, it's not like literally just waking up. Like,
oh, I really, you know, I'm homophobic one day, and the next day I love.
Just wake up the next day. I love people. I love everyone. Like,
no, it doesn't work like that. But it is a. I think there are some people are more inclined to change dependent on their personality and just the way that they've maybe. I think a lot of it too has to come down with the opportunities people have had when it comes to who they've met and the conversations they've been able to have and what they've been able to learn. That makes them feel like, I know I can change. I know how to change, right?
Yeah, dude, it's funny too because I feel like that's like kind of something that like I like got from my parents, right? Like, because my parents always kind of taught me to like not just like take everything at surface value and like not literally just like take everything that you hear and like accept it as the truth and shit, right? So like, you know, especially growing up then as a kid and like having that kind of mindset where I'm questioning things and like even questioning authority and like questioning the standards of living and all these things. It's like, it's funny because like then like I start questioning religion and that's where like the line's drawn, like, and I like, you know, like, and they're totally accepting of it, right? They're like, they're not like hating on me for like doing my own thing, but like other parents definitely would like make it like a whole lot more of an issue than like the way that like I think it is, like, you know, like I don't necessarily bring it up, I don't necessarily you know, I don't know, like talk super freely about it, but that's like out of like my parents' respect because like I know that like they're like still Catholic and they like would prefer me not like, you know, trashing the Catholic religion or anything. And
I think it's really, when it comes to your beliefs about religion or not, I think it's pretty inconsequential in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah,
you know, between
I agree.
people. I think it's only important within your own experience to figure out, you know, is there a higher power? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, it's like finding some kind of drive, some kind of purpose, right?
Some people will find all of their purpose, and some people will find none of their purpose within that. So it doesn't matter either way, right? People are still going to live their lives and go through shit and yada yada yada. It doesn't matter. But yeah, I don't know. I think when it comes to being a parent, though, I mean, fuck. I would like to hope that if I have kids and I raise them, that if there's something within me that they question within themselves later down the line and they figure out a different way of living, I would like to be open enough to be like, hey, like, what is that? Like, what did you learn?
Like,
teach me.
Honest to God, that's like, dude, like, because like that's kind of like, you know, I want to be able to raise a kid so that when they're my age now, or like when my age of like when I had them, like, they could be teaching me so many new fucking things that like I didn't know before.
I'm trying to evolve with them.
Like, like fucking like I want you to have a life so that you can teach me and other people about it and shit like that. You know, it's not like I don't want you to like become a mini me.
That's boring,
right?
And like, the only reason I think one of the biggest reasons parents feel the need to do that is because they feel a sense of pride and like identity with the person that they are, and they feel like if oh, if my kid or someone younger than me knows something else that I don't, like that's
it's like,
bullshit.
Well, I'm wiser. I've been on Earth long.
Too much ego.
It's like, it's like, well,
right.
It's like, why'd you send your kid to college then?
Right. Yeah.
Like,
right. What again? It's like you want better for them, but then you get mad when they do better. Like, what is
exactly.
That? You know, it doesn't make any sense.
It's funny.
It is. It's very ironic, but I don't think a lot of parents are aware of it, and the ones that are may not know how to change that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely
which is unfortunate. Again, you got to have compassion,
mm-hmm.
right? Like you can't just be like, oh, my parents suck and they don't know anything and they're the worst pieces of shit ever. Like, nah, man. Like they're just a product of their environment and everything that they grew up with. You know?
Right. It's just a cycle in that sense, and that's why we're kind of saying, you know, try to break that cycle. Man.
Try and humanize them, man. Try and see them as a separate being that's just trying to figure their own shit out.
Yeah,
you know?
Most definitely.
It may look to you like they've given up or like they don't know what they're doing anymore, but like internally they're still struggling. They're still trying to.
There's still people down to the core.
They're trying to. They want to be happy. You know, everyone wants to be happy. And I think that's an important thing to have, especially when it comes to parents that are. I mean, here's another thing too. Like, even between our experiences, like I don't think we've experienced some awful shit when it comes to what our parents have done to us throughout our upbringing.
Yeah,
but
like I've never been like physically abused or anything like that.
Same. But like, there's some really awful extreme shit that I would personally recommend some people just completely need to cut them out of your lives at some point, right?
Yeah.
Like if parents are toxic enough, like you need to cut them out completely.
Yeah. Oh, dude, you know? I think it's funny too because like I don't know, like people think of like your bloodline, right? Like as the end all be all of like what is family and
family.
Like, what.
Blood,
yeah, dude, like fucking if my mom was like physically abusing me and beating me and like never wanted to change her ways, like fucking sayonara, like I'm not gonna think twice about it. Like
I would not put up with that for a second.
Yeah,
no. Especially at this point in my life.
You know? Yeah, like I'm saying that from like now, you know, like if you're like 13 years old and that's happening, like I don't know what to tell you that's just gonna make that fucking better.
Right. I like to imagine like being a kid and being helpless, you know, like you are in a situation that you don't have any control over and your parents are just exerting their dominance over you. And that's a shame because kids have to grow up in that environment.
Right. Like what do you do? Like how do you
What do you do? I don't know if I have the answers for kids that are like stuck in that situation.
No,
I wish there were more resources for kids to be able to get out of that situation, you know, when it comes to child protection services and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I don't know enough about that to even, you know, say this or that, but
yeah, I can't really speak on it.
I think there needs to be more resources within school for for kids to talk to people and be like, hey, I'm experiencing this at home, I'm experiencing that, and like just more openness with that. But I think when it comes, and for most people, it seems like they just had to deal with it, right? And they grew up and became an adult, and then they moved. A lot of the time I've talked to people, it seems like they're just like itching to get the fuck away from their parents, you know? And like I get that. For whatever reason. It could be for simple reasons, it could be for extreme reasons. But usually the more extreme, the more they want to get out. Yeah, you know?
Most definitely.
So it makes sense. But when it comes to the extreme shit, man, like it's really tough. I think you almost have to create a divide between your upbringing and what you are now, you know? And that's a process, right? Being able to create an entire you know, different life for yourself than the one that you lived, right? Up to whenever you were able to distance yourself from from your parents. But that's a really hard thing to do, man. And I think a lot of the people struggle with just the subtle things, right? Like, because no parent is perfect, right? There's the extremes of parents that are absolutely abhorrent, awful, but then there's parents that are like in the middle and some that are like pretty damn good, right? But I don't know, man. Like, I've talked to so many people that they just struggle with the idea of like, you know, what am I doing? Like, I was brought up this way and now I'm living this way. Like, why is this like this? Like, I don't understand what's going on. And it's like, I don't think a parent is there to give you the answers to that, but they should help guide you to find that answer for yourself. For yourself,
you know? Yeah, most definitely.
And I think you can, as a parent, at least suggest certain things, right? You can at least be like, hey, like, what about this perspective? What about this way of living, right? So that's really important. But if you didn't get that, and I think most people haven't, right? You have to create it on your own.
Yeah.
You know? And we'll get into that, but I think maybe I should talk about my experience too before we dive into like the whole breaking the cycle thing.
Go for it.
Okay, so it's weird too because I think a lot of my memories from like 0 to like 10 are super hazy, but for the most part, I had a pretty good childhood on paper, you know, in terms of basic, fundamental, like, you know, living at a certain standard of, you know, existence, right? You know, my parents cared about me and my sister. We had shelter, food, all that stuff. They worked hella hard to like provide, which is great. And yeah, I mean, there were a lot of things that I think I didn't realize as a kid that I look back on. I'm like, oh shit, that's kind of crazy. Like my parents fought a bit, and you know they had their moments of like tension in their relationship. You know, almost divorcing certain points and shit like that. And like I was like, what? Like that's a thing. I had to be reminded of that as an adult. I'm like, that happened, you know? Yeah. And so, you know, for the most part though, like when I look back, it's a generally okay view of like my upbringing, you know? I think when it comes to like becoming a teenager and that transitioning phase of like, you know, going through school and all that, my parents were very supportive throughout school and like throughout things. I played sports, I played baseball, basketball, shit like that. My dad was super into that stuff. My mom was like always there, you know, doing shit. My dad worked a lot more than my mom, but he was still very like involved in my life. My parents were usually pretty good about like, I will say they were pretty good about like trying to talk to me about what was going on. Yeah. You know, they were always curious, which was, it's such a nice thing to have.
That is nice. Like them showing an interest.
Yeah. Even if it isn't in the most like direct or like important
the way that you would like want it, right? Yeah.
It's still the effort that matters, right?
Absolutely.
And yeah, I think I really do appreciate that part of it because there's a lot of parents that just don't even try to talk to their kids and they just give up, especially when they're teenagers. But my parents never really gave up, which is, you know, props to them because I was a fucking shithead and so was my sister. My sister was even worse, to be honest. Like, and she'll admit it too. Like, she was a fucking witch, man. Oh my god, she was wild. But anyways, yeah, no, I mean, throughout my teenage years, like they kind of supported whatever I was doing. To be honest, I played baseball, I played video games, I hung out with my friends. You know, I had a pretty like, you know, suburban white kid, like happy-go-lucky upbringing. You know, we didn't. My parents didn't struggle with money too much. Not that we were rich or anything, but like my dad worked his ass off, and my mom was usually, she stayed at home for a while and she worked a little bit here and there and all that. But overall, like I don't remember having any like super big moments of like, oh fuck, like, you know, money's an issue, right? There's always like food on the table, like you know, bills paid, like it was pretty fine. But I'm sure there were moments that it was maybe a little bit tougher, depending. But another thing too is like my parents were pretty like generous with like the things that they bought for me and my sister, right? Like they bought us a lot of toys, a lot of video games. You know, I would always like be like, oh shit, new Pokemon coming out, like can we get it tomorrow? And they're like, yeah, dude. You know, which is dope, man. Like that. I think that's I don't know. That was like, I don't think that I was spoiled growing up. I just think that my parents like to do nice things for me, you know, like, and that taught me that like, oh shit, like, you know, like it's nice to do nice things for people. You know, it's nice to just do something just for the sake of doing something for someone else.
It's nice to get someone a gift. It's nice to,
I think the spoiling part would only be if, you know, a parent didn't teach you that even if you have these things, you know, it doesn't do anything for you. It doesn't like make you any better, you know? Right. And my parents instilled that in me. You know?
Like this Pokemon game doesn't, you know, make you a god.
I got the new Pokemon on the day it came out. What's up?
Well, maybe a god like in the game, right? Balling out.
Yeah, right. But but no, like I think generally it was pretty solid. You know, I don't have any major complaints. There were times I had arguments with my parents, and you know, there were things happening in my life that were like causing tension, but nothing insane, right? I was a pretty decent kid. You know, I got decent grades. I did my homework. I didn't like cause any trouble in school really. And yeah, I mean, we had a pretty like, you know, balanced relationship for most of my life, I feel like, even up till now. And I think one of the biggest things that they were very good at balancing the amount of like involvement and also the amount of like stepping back.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Which props to them, because that's insanely hard to balance as a parent. But
like figure that out. Yeah.
Like, and don't get me wrong, part of that process of learning that balance, there were times where either my parents were a bit more, you know, like trying to control certain things than they should have been, but you know, I get it's
part of the learning experience.
I think a lot of the times, like, my mom would be super worried about stuff and my dad would try and calm her down. He was more of like the balancing force in that relationship. And you know, my mom had to really learn to, like, you know, create like that balance, and she did. Like, she's gotten pretty fucking good at that, you know. And I think it's, as you get older, you have to, you know, and a kid goes through their life, you know, you go through high school, you start to be able to drive, you gain more independence. You have to be okay with just like
letting go of the reins for a little bit and be like, okay, like
I don't know how that feels, but like I'm sure it's hard.
I can't attest to that. I'm
sure it's pretty hard, but it's way harder to hold on and cause a distancing in your relationship with your child, right? So I remember having a lot of conversations with my parents about that stuff, and you know, they were always willing to like try and figure things out, which is a great quality to have. Yeah. You know, I never felt like I couldn't talk to them, really. Yeah. I mean, there were times where like I think I created this sense of like, oh, like I'm, you know, I don't know if I can tell this to them or blah blah blah, but like, that's more my own like insecure like anxiety as like a teenager, you know, just like being angsty and shit. Right. But yeah, I don't know. I think one of the biggest things I value is just, I felt like I had a fair amount of freedom to do things, like not in a sense where it's like, oh, go do whatever you want, but like they had a good balance of like, these are the rules, but you can also have fun and do this and that. Like it didn't feel too restrictive, right? Yeah. And that's pretty like that's something I would definitely take into being a parent myself, is like just like that they found a pretty decent balance, right? Yeah. But again, the world's different, right? So like you gotta adapt to the times as well, not just as a parent. But yeah, they did pretty good with that, and you know, I think generally, like, again, pretty smooth. But I'm trying to think of like, you know, I don't want to be too critical of them either, but I think there were probably times where I wish there was a bit more of an emotional like attempt to like, you know, understand what's going on inside of me and like relating that to like what they have experienced, you know? Yeah. Being more of like a humanization of my parents, like them showing that side of them, being more emotional, being more vulnerable, more open, right?
Opening their lives up to you.
Yeah, more. I wish that was a bit more of a thing that I saw. I saw it occasionally, but I think you know, it would have been better if I saw that more, because it took me a while to realize, oh shit, my parents are their own person. They're adults. They have struggles. They, you know, all this stuff.
Right, yeah, because, like, I mean, growing up for a while, I mean, you view your parents, if your parents aren't awful to you, you kind of view them as, like, you know, like, oh, they're the best. Like, everything's always okay with them. Like, you know,
I mean,
their mom for some and dad,
people,
like, right, yeah.
We don't want to generalize too much, because, I know a lot of people that looked at their parents and are like, yeah, you fucked. Like, you know, yikes. Like,
yeah, but, I mean, like if you, like, enjoy your parents and, like, growing up, you're like you kind of, like idolize them maybe in a way, because, like, that's, like, your role models for the most part, right?
That's the only thing you really, I mean, not the only thing, but it's one of the biggest things you have to go off of. I mean, you're living with these people. They are constantly showing you how you should live just without even saying anything. Yeah. You know? Yeah. And that's a big thing too, is like when you're young, you don't even have there's no like, you don't even need to communicate certain things. Like you just see, you know, the way they react emotionally, the way they navigate, you know? And that stuff, I wish I could look back very clearly and see like what were the things that, you know, happened back then that still might affect me now, or like affected me when I was younger. All that stuff though, like I don't think you necessarily need to like dive super deep into it, you know, because you really can't, right? Like you can't, your memories are not accurate enough to even
it's hard to like picture, right? Dive in there and pull out all the specifics that happened.
Yeah, I think a lot of times something will come up that will show you what you need to work on, but besides that, I don't, you know, you shouldn't go crazy with like, let's shift through my bucket of trauma, you know? But yeah, I think growing up as a teenager, pretty solid. Into adulthood, I remember I had a huge issue with my parents about when we worked at the life insurance place.
Oh god, fuck that
was
place,
that was a rough time.
That was rough too. My parents were like, We're like, dude, what the fuck are you doing?
Yep. So
and
me and
Tyler,
like,
I'm making money, even though I fucking wasn't. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Well, I made decent money from it, but
dude, I made $500 in 3 months. That's what I made. Big there.
Baller.
That was fucking horrible. I look back at that and just it was so bad.
It was an interesting time. Me and Tyler sold life insurance at this place when we turned 18. Around when we turned 18. That's a wild thing to say, right? Yeah. I tell people about that, and they're like, "What?"
Yo, yeah, Tyler and I sold life insurance when we were 18. Yeah,
it's not what you would expect to come out of our mouths, right? So we did that for whatever fucking reasons, and at the time, I remember I was just like, "Oh, this is cool and interesting and new." Like, I'm 18, I'm just
gonna make some big money doing it.
Like, it sounded pretty interesting. Like, it was a new experience. I was like, "Fuck it, let's do it." My parents though were like, "Oh my God, no way, you can't do this. Like, this is gonna be a train wreck. Like, they're just gonna try and take your money and blah blah blah." And like, they thought that I wasn't gonna go to school for like X-ray or like I was like just gonna drop my whole life.
I'm dropping out and becoming a life insurance agent.
And it's so, looking back, it's so goofy because like I never was even remotely close to getting that serious about it. Yeah. And throughout my life, I never was the type of person who would just like drop everything I'm doing and just go in an opposite direction. I was pretty like constant with the way that I navigated life. So for them to think that, I was like, what the fuck? Like, can't you guys, don't you guys trust me, you know? Yeah. But looking back too, I could see why they thought that. You know, from the outside, it looked pretty like sketch, and it was
a fucking pyramid scheme.
Yeah, and it was, you know, 100%. Like, but I was like, dude, I want to experience this for myself. I want to see for myself like what this is all about. You know, like I don't see the consequence of trying this. You know, just to try it. And man, there was a lot of fights about that, but eventually, you know, I did it for myself. I did it for like a whole summer or a little bit more than that.
I don't even remember how long I did it. All I know is that like I was there doing those cold calls and literally getting nothing, and then going to the city to drive to these appointments where no one ever fucking showed up, and then I just remembered just never showing up again and not saying anything to anyone.
It was a whack ass experience, man. I drove to the south side of Chicago one time and stayed there till like 2 or 3 in the morning to sell life insurance to this lady, and then she just canceled it, and I lost out on like $600.
That's sick.
Over like, we spent like 6 hours there.
That's so cool.
You know, so cool, man. And I risked my life as an 18-year-old boy. Yeah. No, I mean, it's just it's crazy as fuck to think about, but yeah, like I went through that, and you know, eventually I was like, yeah, I'm done with this. Like, this isn't providing any sense of satisfaction for me, and I, you know, went back to do other work, and I was in school, and my parents were like, oh, thank God, you know, like, and I was like, bro, I was never planning on like dropping out of fucking school. Like, what are you thinking? You know, and it's like, I think that, again, looking back, that was more of like their own personal thing to deal with rather than, you know, me like not doing what they didn't want me to do.
Well, I think that's part of the struggle, like kind of growing up between, you know, parents and kids is like, you know, there are 100% times where parents know better than you. Absolutely. And then there are times, even when that's the case, where you're like, okay, sure, but like, I'm going to fucking do this anyway. Right. Because I want to know for myself.
You can't know for me. Right. That's the basic misunderstanding between kids and parents sometimes, you know?
Like, they can have those gut feelings of like, like, it's probably a fucking pyramid scheme.
And there's blatant things like, oh, like, don't go to this party with like a bunch of drug dealers and like fucked up shit going, you know, like don't do blatantly like risky shit, you know, especially if it's at the risk of your own life. You know, like you should step in and be assertive in those situations. But when it comes to things that are fairly inconsequential in terms of like there's no risk to their life, there's no risk to their mental health, there's no risk to, like, let them do what they need to do. Then let them figure it out for themselves.
It's like advise them. Don't not advise them. Don't be like, oh yeah, you're gonna go work for a pyramid scheme company. Cool.
You don't have to be enthusiastic about it either, you know?
You don't have to be like, yeah, fuck
just be neutral about it. Just be like, you know, my kid's trying this, whatever. Like, I don't know if it's legit, but maybe it is. I don't know. Like, you never know. Like, don't try to know for your kids, right? That's not your job.
Right, but yeah, advising, I think, is a good point for that. It's just like, it's like, hey, like, I don't think it's a good idea, but like,
if you do, then fuck it.
If you want to do it, go for it.
Right, and I understand as a parent, it's like
it's got to be hard.
It's definitely it's like
you can know deep down, it's like this is a fucking pyramid scheme.
Like holy shit, you're being so stupid.
It's like trying to prove a point. It's like it's like why the fuck? Like just listen to me. It's like I think that's gonna be like. Something that's tough for like a lot of people, like even like today, even us to a certain extent, if we become parents, right? Like to not have that over assertion of like, you know, like I'm the parent, I'm right. Yeah. You know, that type of thing. Because like, you know, especially when you get a kid who's like in their teens like that, you know, in that angsty like I'm gonna do what I want type of phase, it's hard to like, I'm sure it's hard as fuck to just try to like accept it and be like, yeah, like you're making a huge mistake, but go ahead and do it anyway. Like,
right. Because you want to save your kid from pain, right?
Right. Like because you, I'm sure in some life experience that our parents have had, they've seen something like that. Because like my parents were telling me the same fucking things. They're like, don't, like, why are you doing this? Like, don't work at this place. This seems really fishy. Like, if it sounds too good to be true, probably it usually is. Yeah. Like, right, all that shit. And I was like, oh, fuck it, you know. But like, it's like the same thing. It's like hard, you know. How do you like just accept that? And
I don't think it's like a full acceptance in the way of like, oh, I love that they're doing this, like I'm so excited for them to fuck themselves over. Like, no, you just have to find a middle ground between like, I am personally not okay with this, but I know that I can't control my child's life, especially as an adult now, if they're 18 or older. And I don't think age is also not even the only factor. I think it's just respect.
Not necessarily.
I think it's respect that's really important. Like, you need to respect this being that you made enough to be like, you know what, even if this is a mistake and they flounder and it hurts them, they need to learn this for themselves. Yeah. And that's something that I can't protect them from.
I think respect and like also like faith, right?
To some extent, right? You have to have faith like in the child that you brought up. You know, you have to have faith in what they are.
Yeah, because the goal is to make them a good person, right? That's what I would like to think. Like, to
some extent, yeah.
Right, you know, it's like you want to raise a kid who's going to be a good person, who's going to make it through life and live on their own and stuff, right? So it's like, you know, you got to have faith in that. Like, you're going to instill in them these values and these morals and stuff. And, like, it's like, okay, it's like, well, if they want to go ahead and try out this life insurance agency, like, whatever. Like,
yeah, I mean,
I know they'll come to the right conclusion, right? It's like having faith that, like...
Right, so rather than get into your own personal bubble of, like, oh, I'm so anxious about it, I don't know, like, what's going to happen. Like, that's all your own shit to deal with, to be honest. Like, I'm sorry. Like, that's not your kids' shit to deal with, right? You can't project all of your
projection.
Really, absolutely. That's a huge thing that a lot of parents do. And it's like, you can't project all of these feelings that you're having internally onto your kid because they're not theirs to deal with. Like, this is, you have to really like accept the fact that your child is living their own fucking life at some point. Yeah, you have to accept that. And as a parent, I don't want to feel like, you know, like, I constantly have to worry about them until the end of my life, you know? Like, I don't want to have to feel like, you know, like, oh shit, like if something, you know, bad happens to them, like I'm just going to be a complete shell of a human being, right? Like, I need to have my own humanity, my own experience separate from my kids' experience.
Right. I think that's tough for parents to do. Like, obviously it's tough. But like, I think what's tough about it is that like you spend so many years being a parent, being like
raising a child,
holding this
a baby,
kid's hand through life, and then one day, you know, not literally one day,
but it's a process, right?
Figure of speech there, but like, you know, and then like one day, they're just gonna, you know, let go of your hand and go be their own person, and it's like, well, tough, it's like, what do I do after that? Like, right?
Well,
like,
and what did you do before you had a kid?
Yeah, it's like, well, what did you do before? Like, you have your own life to live still. Like, so you have things that you need to do.
You need to recreate yourself while also still being supportive of your child, right? I'm not saying completely disconnect from them. I'm saying support them from a distance, right? Be a cheerleader, right? Be like someone on the sidelines, you know, and watch their life unfold. Because the most loving thing you can do for them is that, right? Just let them be. Let them, you know, live their life the way that they think they should live, right? I think that's love to some extent.
I think so too.
You know, and again, there's going to be, I think another misconception is like, after your kid becomes an adult, like, you're just done. Like, no, like, you can still help your child immensely, even as going into adulthood. Even,
like, I'm an adult now, but like, I don't know how to deal with like all types of insurance and like all this other shit.
I mean, there's those practical things too, but like, you know, even just like the emotional struggle of life.
Like, I've never, like, I think the only like death in the family that I've ever had was like when I was super young, and it was
Same.
like my great grandma. So
Oh, same.
like things like that. My parents have obviously had like more deaths in their lives, like family and things like that, and like that's something that I haven't like dealt with per se, right?
I just remember too, we didn't really talk about relatives, and that how it goes into your upbringing as well.
Relatives,
right? Yeah.
Oh yeah,
relatives. Like,
yes.
Because
other people in your family.
Obviously, you're not living. I mean, you might be living with some of your relatives, but
yeah, might be the case for some people.
When you're growing up, you have exposure to your extended family, right? Like your relatives, and so, dude, for me, I mean, shit, I can attribute a lot of interesting things that I've experienced to my experiences with my relatives. I had a pretty close knit Italian family that was like, we saw each other for holidays and throughout the years.
I have a lot of cousins.
Yeah,
and
I frequently
uncles,
saw my
aunts.
parents when I was younger, or my relatives.
Yeah, I was like your parents. I'm like, yeah, I would think so.
I saw them every day. But no, like my relatives are totally different from my parents too. Like,
yeah, same here.
Like it's a very interesting thing to think about. Like, all the little things that I gathered just from those interactions as a child. I don't want to get too into it with like explicit people, but like, I just think it's there's a lot of little things. I think the main part of it is your parents, right? What they do.
At the core of it all, because that's like, again, like who you're constantly around and who you're constantly learning from.
And I will give props to my parents again too, because my grandma was always trying to be like, oh, Joe, you should do this, you should be more strict, you should be like that, blah 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 blah, trying to give
them advice on how to raise their
kid. To make them parent the way they want them to parent. And so, and my mom and dad were always very good about being like, no, like we're doing this our way.
That's like, so funny to think about, that like even like grandparents can affect the way your parents raise you then.
Well, I mean, shit, they're still alive, assumingly, if they are, but there's, man, my dad's mom has a lot of influence over, or had a lot of influence over him, or tried to exert that influence, and it was a lot of fighting back and forth. But yeah, that's a huge thing you have to factor in. I think that was a good
thing to bring up, like relatives.
It's crazy, bro.
Yeah, I mean, and there's like a bunch of things that like shape your family from relatives like that too. Like I know, like for like my family, like my mom and her sister, there was like a whole family thing that happened like fucking like, I don't know, like 15 years ago now. Yeah. Something like that, where like I'm not gonna get into like the whole details of the story, but basically it was like a family feud, right? Like my mom and her sister don't talk anymore, and we don't see them, and that aunt and uncle and even cousins, like I don't talk to them. They haven't reached out for me for birthdays and vice versa and stuff. So it's kind of like, it's like things like that can also like kind of shape it, and like see like, it kind of goes into what I was saying, that like just because we're blood related doesn't like they're technically family, but like I don't fucking know them. Like
I don't know. I've talked to so many people who maybe had really strained familial relationships with their blood relatives, but found family within people not related by blood. Yeah. And that's a beautiful thing. I think really what makes family is the connection you have with other humans, right? Yeah. I really believe, like, of course there is some biological connection that you have when you literally make a child and you raise that child. But at the same time, it's still a human thing, right? What is the difference between a mother and a son, and a different mother and a different son? You know what I mean? Like, there's still that, unconditional love that I think people should have for one another, right? And compassion. But it's interesting, though, because when it comes to familial things, you're so comfortable with these people. You've known them your whole lives that it becomes very easy to just kind of be like, oh, whatever, and get lazy and just, but
it's like, oh, they're family, like,
right? Like, again, we've talked about that before too, but like that familiarity, you get too familiar and you just you become too comfortable with like, oh, like I already did that, I already did my job, I already did my work, I already, and it's like, but it never really ends, right? I don't think it ever really ends unless you die, right? Right. And that's a bit morbid, but like, yeah, it's just like, I don't know, man. It's tough. I think maybe now we could get into, the whole idea of breaking the cycle, because that's something that I think a lot of people are very wrapped up in. I've met quite a few people throughout my life who had different parents and different upbringings and all this shit, and it's like, the struggles that people go through are very much intertwined with the past things that they experienced, the traumas, the hardships that they experienced growing up. And I think it's tough to kind of bridge that gap of like, you're like, oh, like I went through all this trauma and like now I'm just here fucking have PTSD, like I have all these issues and mental health stuff, and it's like, what do I do? You know, and I think I said this at the beginning, but it's for a lot of people, I don't think it's going to be about like severing any like, you know, connection to your parents or anything like that, or your family. It's more about creating something new from what you have to work with. Right. So I don't know. I don't want to generalize too much because this advice may not be suited for everyone, depending on what your upbringing looked like and what your, you know, parent situation is. But I think you really have to start doing the work of, you know, separating yourself as a distinct individual, separate from your parents. You know, like we were talking about before. You have to do that within your own mind. Right.
Just because you're family doesn't mean that you literally have to be the same exact way. Right. And like
you shouldn't be.
The things that have happened within those familial grounds, you know, make who you are specifically.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you should be. It would be, not only would it be boring, but it would create the same cycle. You would do the same, you would make the same mistakes as them. You would experience the same suffering that they did. Right. To some extent. Obviously the world looks different, but you have to adapt, right? So you have to almost disconnect yourself from what you know to be true and disregard some of it. Some of it. You can pick and choose what's good and what's bad, just like we were talking about our upbringings. There were good things, there were bad things, right? And you can take the good and leave the bad, right? And just leave the bad. You don't have to erase it. You know, you don't have to fight against it.
And like leaving it doesn't necessarily mean like you know, tying it to your ankle and letting it drag behind you for the rest of your life and shit.
You gotta cut that fucking
drop
shit,
it.
Dude. Drop it. And
drop it.
You don't have to erase it from your memory. You don't have to like try and like.
It's not like, you know, it's like deleting it.
No, you can't. You can't fucking do that. And these feelings that are associated with these parts of your upbringing are gonna come up over and over again, right? So the work really comes down to becoming more aware of what's happening in your direct present moment experience and deciphering what still affects you from your upbringing and what doesn't, right? Because I think some people get too caught up with thinking that they are the way they are because I've been through so much shit and you don't understand, like blah, blah, blah. You have to completely collapse that identity and just break it down brick by brick, you know, and be honest with yourself. Like, why am I still acting this way? Is it because I was taught this? And if I was taught this, how do I unlearn this, right? And I think the way that you unlearn it is by learning to do something else in place of that and becoming more aware of when this habitual way of acting and thinking comes into play, right? So let's think of an example, like, you know, your parents used to yell at you, you know, when you got bad grades on a test or something, right? So now when you're working as an adult, like, and you fail at something, this whole wave of anxiety comes up and you're like, oh, my boss is going to get mad at me or something. Okay. And that anxiety is going to cause you suffering if you don't do something about it, right? So what do you do? Right? What do you do?
Where do you go from there?
Where do you go from there? Because that's a very little thing, right?
Yeah, it's a very minor, pretty general like example though.
But it's something that I think a lot of people probably could experience or have experienced. So let's say, you know, you did something wrong at work, that anxiety comes up and you're consumed by it, right? Because let's say you're not aware enough to even realize that came up. You look back at that and say, okay, what was that? Why did that happen? Right? And you don't fucking dive deep into the inner recesses of your mind. No. You work with that anxiety as its own thing, right? You say, okay, that came up out of what? It came up out of nothing, really. It came out of, like, what is a feeling, right? It doesn't, there's no like direct origin of a feeling. It just came up, right? Within your mind, right? And then somewhere in your body, you can feel that. And so you almost have to like deconstruct the layers of what is happening, right? And then be like, okay, this anxiety, is this linked to something? When I look at this anxiety straight up, is there a thought that is linked to it, right?
Yeah, like where's my mind going when I look at it?
Yes.
In that sense,
is there like a subconscious layer of it too? Like, do my parents get brought up with this anxiety? Like, can I compare this anxiety to the anxiety I feel when I interact with my parents now? You know, because you can really start to see the patterns in certain things then, you know, and it's kind of freaky.
Dude, an example of that is, referencing Dr. K again, Healthy Gamer GG, really cool guy. He was sharing a little bit of his upbringing with one of the guys in whatever fucking video I was watching at the time. But he was talking about how when he was in like graduate school working on his thesis or big project or something, he was really worried that the professor that was like assisting him with the whole thing, or like classmate or one of the other, like was like gonna eventually like end up taking all the glory and like credit of it and like take it away from him and stuff. And this is an example he was giving to whoever it was, and he was saying that he's like, and I thought about it for a while and finally came to the conclusion that, he's like I think the reason why like I was feeling that, because like the guy wasn't gonna do anything like that. He's like, it was all like generated from within myself. He's like, because when I was a kid, he's like, I had an awesome lemonade stand. He's like, I was making bank, like I was doing whatever, or like he was like selling something at school, some like startup business as a kid, and his dad saw that he was like making money and was like, where's this coming from, and like confronted him. And then eventually like told him like, that's great that you're doing that and all, but like you got to shut it down, and like basically like took that away from him. So then he in that moment was able to connect like, oh, like I was feeling like this guy was going to take this away from me because of a moment that happened in my past, because my dad took that away from me.
So there's a reason for a lot of the things that you experience now, the things that you feel now, the negative emotions that come up, right? I don't think you need to search out a reason. You just need to ask where this is coming from, and your mind will tell you usually, right? If you're genuinely asking your mind like, what is this, right? Like, you can usually, your mind is like a fucking database, dude. It's extremely like complicated, right? And so you really have to start working with your mind, I think, and that with that kind of stuff, right? Rather than see it as like this source of
use it
anxiety.
To help you unveil these things, right? Like just figure it out, like instead of using it, or not using it, but like letting it kind of just fucking beat you up with this shit,
letting it control you, right?
Exactly.
The thinking is happening to you are not thinking. You know what I mean?
Ooh.
I saw that recently. It's not my original thought.
Oh, fuck you then.
But I'm just But no, I think that's how it is for a lot of people, man.
No, I agree.
And so you have to really start taking control and being curious. That's a very important thing, is being curious about what you're experiencing, why it's happening, what is actually happening, right? Because when you break it down, these things are not actually making you do anything, right? They're not forcing you to act in a certain way. You're just acting in response to those feelings because that's your habitual way of reacting, right? You're used to doing that. You've practiced reacting that way, right? So you have to become aware enough to realize that that is a habit, right? And where that appears within your life, and then you have to create a whole new practice routine for every little thing that still plagues you from your upbringing, right? And that's so much easier said than done.
Oh yeah.
Much easier said than done. But I think my recommendation is, people really should, honestly, I recommend meditating, meditate on some of these things, like, and start to, also meditating is like just something you can do to overall raise your awareness and your level of consciousness so that you can see these things. You slow things down a little bit so that you can see clearly what is this, right?
Like when you're sitting there like doing nothing, essentially is like meditation, right? Like you're gonna have thoughts, you're gonna have things like pop up in your head.
Don't try and control or resist those.
No. But it's like you can like see them and like observe them, and sometimes like if you really want to, you can be like, wow, like this popped out of nowhere, like I kind of want to like dive into this for a second, like
contemplate it. You should have a contemplative practice too. It's not just meditating, right? So meditating itself is not like doing anything special, right? You're just sitting back so that you can observe for a moment, and then throughout your day-to-day life, you can start to, you're almost meditating without actually meditating. You're just trying to be aware of what is happening as it's happening, right? So that you can catch it. And once you're able to catch it enough, you can start to peel back those layers, and then you can start to practice in a more wholesome way, right? You can start to do things that will replace that negative habitual thing that is causing anxiety, causing depression, causing pain in your life. And you can really start to create a whole new experience of life, you know? And that's a beautiful thing to be able to do. Yeah. It really is. I think I've experienced that in relation to the way I felt when I was younger versus the way I feel now. But bro, this has been like a process of years of trying to do this shit now, you know? And I didn't even go through some really awful, insane shit growing up, right? I can't imagine how much harder it is for someone who's really gone through some thick, heavy stuff, you know? Right. But the process is still the same.
It's right? The same process.
You just might have to take
the journey might be a little bit longer.
It might be longer, and you might have to take baby steps, right? Don't just dive into this shit, right?
Yeah, because if you got some really dark, twisted turmoil that's happened,
go to therapy too, man. Therapy, meditation, those two right there will get you a long way. They really will. But again, you have to put in a lot to those things. You have to have a genuine intention to want to change.
Right. Yeah. You can't just willy-nilly go at it.
Those things aren't going to give you anything, right? You're only getting what you put out. Right. It's a direct trade, you know? Right. It has to be. And so I would definitely recommend those things as more practical things, but I think you can also just change your perspectives on a lot of the things that happen in your mind when you think about your past, you know? You have to become very aware of what you identify with about your past. Very aware. When it comes to some of the memories that you hold on to about your upbringing, when it comes to the feelings that you have towards your parents now that are affected by your past, are you actually mad at your parents right now, or are you mad about something that they did 10 years ago? Yeah. You know?
Yeah. That's a big thing.
Are you just reacting to them based on all of the shit that you've experienced with them throughout life in this ball of negative shit and reacting to them autonomously? Yeah. Or not autonomously.
Dude, yeah, because I mean, it could be like just like a ball of like all this shit that happened in your childhood that you never confronted and is now
and
sitting
they never
there.
Confronted either.
And they never confronted either, and it's just sitting there now. And so instead of like being in the present moment and seeing the things and how they're going with your parents and like your interactions like that, like your interactions are tainted by that ball of negative emotion that's just sitting there.
That has been one of my biggest challenges, is realizing how much
I agree
of a habit I have of reacting in a negative way to my parents without any stimuli from them. Yeah. I would just be automatically negative and rude towards them. And I never knew why until I became more aware of what was happening within that moment. And what was happening was I was either annoyed or mad or whatever based on all these. I mean, who do you have the most history with within your life when you're in your 20s, right? Your parents. Right? Yeah. Most likely.
Parents
not
and
everyone.
Siblings. Right?
They might, there's people who are.
But like bottom line, it's like family, right?
Whoever raised
you, like grandparents, aunts and uncles.
Can be anything like that, right? So you have to acknowledge that and realize that this person has a huge emotional charge for you, most likely. Yeah. Whether you realize it or not, it's there. That charge, that energy is there. And so you have to become aware of that and see very clearly how you react to certain things and why that's happening and what is happening, all of these things. And once you start to break it down bit by bit, it becomes a lot easier. You're like, oh shit.
It's just like practicing it, right?
You have to practice. It's an intentional thing, right? You have to mentally practice that, it's a mental thing. But it's also, I think also, you brought up a good point about just being present, right? I think some of the most beautiful moments I've had with my parents was when I just didn't react to anything. Yeah. Right?
I would definitely agree to. Yeah.
Yeah. I let them talk, or I just let things be as they are, and things are a lot more peaceful that way. Right? And so that's also another thing, is non-reactivity. Even if your parents are still being actively awful in your life and saying things to try and bother you and make you mad, you have the option to just not react. Yeah. And it's not about you will be the bigger person, but it's not even about that. I think it's just about doing that for the sake of your own
it's like
health.
what's best for you, like reacting and getting pissed off and snapping back and then getting into an argument, or just being like, okay, whatever.
Yeah, you have to drop the defensiveness and the need to protect your own ego. The ego that you're protecting is one that they helped build.
Yeah, I would think so. You know? Yeah, definitely.
They really did, and your ego is partly their ego. Yeah, you know, you have to realize you guys are intertwined in that way.
Well, yeah, dude. Okay, so a good example of that. So like my dad and I butt heads sometimes, right? And I think what we kind of both struggle with after a certain point is like when we're arguing about whatever it may be. It's like a battle of like who can prove the other person wrong.
Yeah, it's like I want to be right.
Yeah, it's like a battle of like who's right, and it's like we like neither of us will just like step down, and we'll just get into a huge like pissing match of like fucking just whatever it is, and like trying to defend our egos, and we go on, and like, you know, my mom will leave the room, my sister comes out and just tells us like shut the fuck up, or like, you know, it's like something, and it's like and then finally we like settle down, and then like I like look back at it, and I'm like, dude, like why the fuck were we even arguing? Like
what even just happened?
Yeah, exactly. And then I'll go upstairs and like apologize, and then we like talk about it, and like my dad's like, yeah, like I don't even know, like
it's a shame.
Yeah, like it's like shit just like goes like that.
You're falling into each other's pitfalls normally. Yeah, usually. Yeah, you know, like you're digging a hole for each other, right? And it's so easy to get lost in that.
Right.
It's so easy.
And then at the end of the day, if you can't even look back and be like what were we even arguing about? It's like you just wasted all that time screaming at each other for literally nothing.
So that's the point. A big point to make too is like no one is right in any situation. Yeah. Right. There is no right guy, wrong guy, good guy, bad guy. If you have an argument with a parent or a family member, and you know it causes pain for both of you, no one wins. Yeah. No one won. Even if you prove your point, even if you feel that you're right about something.
Well, it's like we were referencing the first week, I think, with the monk.
Would you rather be happy?
Would you rather be happy? Right? Yeah, exactly.
And that's, you have to prioritize your happiness and the other person's, because it's not even primarily it has to be about you. That will cause the most change if you prioritize your own joy and peace first more than anything or anyone else's. And then by doing that, secondarily, it will cause the change within them. They will see that you are happier, you are more at peace, right? And your non-reactivity will start to rub off on them. Yeah, you know,
I think so.
To some, in very subtle ways.
Even an inkling, yeah.
Even if it doesn't, let's say your parents are so far gone, right? Not your parents or my parents, just anyone parents, right? They're so far gone, they're lost in their own head, their ego is off the fucking charts, you know, all that shit. Even if that's the case and you can't change them, oh well. Yeah. You know, that's not your job.
Focus on yourself all the more then.
That's not your job. And again, when you really think about it, I think even the worst parent wants the best for their child. Even if they're not presenting that to you. No? You don't
I would not say that.
Maybe not the worst parent.
No, like maybe. Do you think the parents that murder their kids want the best for their kids?
I mean, I don't even consider that like a parent at that. They're just
right. Fucked. But like, I mean, like thinking about it, like specifically like that, right? Like, you know, even the worst parents that bully their kids all day and like call them pieces of trash, I don't think they want the best for their kid. If they wanted the best for their kid, I don't think they would be doing that to them.
You're right. Yeah, I think the way I would say that then is like on the spectrum of like the spectrum of parents who, you know, care, right? Like that aren't like pure evil.
Yeah, if we take out the parents who literally don't care about their kids,
so we have pure evil, that aside. Pure evil, awful intentions, didn't have kids for the right reasons at all, and parents who initially probably did. Yeah, right.
Parents who want to be parents and wanted to have kids.
So on that spectrum,
we'll take those other parents and just
that's more what
them off the table here. Fucking
that's more what I mean.
Yeah, okay.
It's like on that spectrum of like parents who do care, even the worst parents want the best, right? Even if they aren't showing it to you, even if they aren't saying anything that seems like they do, they either did, and they probably still do. Some part of them still does. So just do it for yourself, but also realize that you are doing it for them too. Yeah, right? You're doing it for everyone, for everyone's benefit. somewhere along the way, your prioritization of yourself will cause change in other people. That's positive.
Oh, dude, right? Going back to my example again, like my house is very like open. Like it's not like there's not a whole lot. Like my sister has her own room, parents have their own room, but like our kitchen's open there. We have our living room's open. Our downstairs area is like an entryway going to like an open basement where my brother and I live there, right? And so it's like it's all open. So like when like there's arguing, like when my dad and I argue, like everyone in the fucking house hears it. Everyone in the house has to deal with it. But if we like we as in my dad and I could like take a step back then and like take that prioritization of happiness over being right, then everyone else doesn't have to sit there and suffer through us screaming at each other.
All those rifts that get caused from just you and your dad arguing, even for your sister, your mom, for anyone involved, those things get closed up. And like, because I think over time, it's like creating all these rifts and they get wider and wider the more you try and argue and try and change someone and try and be right about things and all these things that can, cause problems in a familial relationship. Do that over and over again, and like the rifts get wider and wider, but I don't think there's ever a point where you can start to change that, right? And start to close those rifts and heal those wounds, right? There's never a point, unless someone really wrongs you, like really fucks you over, right? Like I don't know, there's some situations where like I would maybe like draw the line, right? Like maybe if like a parent like hit you or like tried to hurt
like
you.
But like even to some extent, if it's out of anger, you can try to find some compassion within that and
you
be
can
like,
find compassion,
they didn't they obviously aren't abusive. They obviously like let their anger get a hold of them.
I mean, like abuse is abuse though. Right,
but like so like say like you and your dad get in an argument, he hits you once and you're like, all right, like fuck you then. Like you think you would do that?
What do you mean? I think you would do what?
Like draw the line there. I said, do you think like you would do that?
By draw the line,
saying? Like
I think I would just create more of a distance in that.
But you wouldn't try to be compassionate.
No, I absolutely would.
That situation.
No, I would be compassionate. I would try and understand it, and to some extent, right? Like you have to be like, okay, like this is my parent, like I can't change that, right?
Yeah.
So you have to work with them. But if someone wrongs you at a certain level for long enough,
that's what I'm saying. Like if it's long enough, like
it's not just one thing. I get what you're saying.
That's what I was saying. Yeah, because like if it's a continuous ongoing thing, like say my dad hit me but showed a lot of remorse and was like dude, like I fucked up, like that was purely out of anger, like that's something that I'm willing to work through. I'm not just gonna be like like fuck you then, Dad, I don't want anything to do with you.
Here's an interesting thought though. Would you accept that in a romantic relationship?
I think it depends, because it's the same thing, right? Like I mean it is the same thing.
Yeah, what's the difference? I don't know.
Like there isn't a difference, but like the difference is whether, again, if it's a continuous ongoing thing, because someone can lose their temper in one moment and snap and like swing at you and hit you, right? But like say I lost my temper on you and snapped and like fucking socked you in the face or something and was like I was then like, fuck dude, like obviously in the moment probably still angry and shit, but like come back to it, review it all and be like, dude, like I'm really sorry that happened, like that's obviously that's not me, like whatever,
I mean
that's a different thing. But like if I was continuously like fucking then like hitting you and like snapping and like fucking
it does, the circumstance matters some.
I think it's very situational,
but like I don't know,
yo, Trico going off right now, dude.
That bird is going off. He's upset. There you go.
Okay. It's like a straight alarm.
I love it. It just wakes me up throughout the day. But yeah, dude, I just have a lot of interesting thoughts about that. I don't, because I was in a physically abusive relationship for some time, and
right.
I again, abuse is abuse, whether it happens once or 20 times, right? I'm not saying that if you do it once, it makes the relationship permanently abusive, people can change, people can acknowledge that, people can, be aware of that. It really depends how they apologize. It depends what they do to reconcile with that, right?
Yeah, and that's really what I'm trying to get at. You know, like if like say a romantic relationship, or like I have a partner and they decide that I'm just gonna beat the shit out of him, and if it's a one-time thing out of anger, I think it depends on like how they're willing to like repent for it, I guess.
I don't know,
like if they're gonna like I don't know. That's a tough question to like really.
I mean, I'm thinking too, like me and you have been friends for years and we never hit each other once.
No,
right?
I've never. Yeah.
I've been friends with all my friends, right? Even my parents, they've never hit me.
Well, I mean, like I can think about like when Say and I slap boxed and he like beat the shit out of me, like I don't look at that as like necessarily abuse,
Well, it's also because of the situation. You guys were joking around and blah blah blah. Like you intentionally wanted to like physically.
Yeah, we were slap boxing.
It wasn't a totally different situation. If someone does something in a serious moment out of anger and decides to physically harm someone else, that is a huge loss of trust that just happened for me personally. If that were to happen,
like I don't even know if it's necessarily that for me, because people act differently when they're boiling with anger, and
it doesn't justify
shit like that. It doesn't justify the action of it, but it doesn't mean to because I feel like the way you're kind of saying it is almost like like it would create a rift then.
It would.
Right,
but it's not like you can't heal that
kind of like isn't that like kind of like holding a grudge then, like, oh, he hit me this one time and that's why this rift is there?
I think it's just acknowledging that there is going to be pain associated with that. If someone hits, if someone that you trust physically assaults, physically harms you, there's going to be a rift.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
No matter what, it's not holding a grudge, but it's going to cause some emotional stuff for you to work through for them and you.
Yeah.
Right. So. Even if it's a parent, right? Like, you can't not acknowledge that. There's levels to that shit too, man. Like, if a parent tried to kill you, like tried to stab you,
Jesus,
that's where I would draw the fucking line.
Dude, that's where I would fucking run.
Yeah, right. Like, that'd be some crazy
I'm out
shit.
Of there, motherfucker.
Right, but like, there's just a lot of gray area when it comes to stuff like that. I'm sure there's a lot of people who have experienced some pretty intense things with their parents.
It also depends like person to person on like on the willingness of to forgive on things like that, and try to repair a relationship that has maybe gone off the rails like that.
Yeah, it has to be something that both people want to really, if one person, like, if the person who caused the pain is like, oh, I want to, I feel so bad, I'm sorry, well, whatever, and then the victim does not want to or isn't ready to, that's totally valid. Yeah. That is totally valid. But yeah, I think over time, like, you really have to like be like, shit, like there's a lot of things, subtle things that are still weighing you down and causing all that tension in your relationship. Yeah. So again, you gotta fucking be super aware of all those things, man. Break them down like piece by piece by piece by piece, over and over again, until you have nothing left, right? And then you can just view them as another human, right? And just be be open and compassionate and kind towards them, just like you would anyone else, and still have that love for them without all the tainted shit. Right.
Yeah, that ball of negative shit isn't going to be.
It's not associated with your familial relationship with them anymore. And I don't know if there's like a holy grail land where like that happens. Like, there's not like I finally got everything off the list. Like, no, it's just like an ongoing process, because especially if your parents are still involved in your life, and you guys, your relationship is still evolving and shit. Like, you have to like constantly like readapt.
Because as you're clearing that list, other things can be filling spots that you just cleared, right?
Right. Like, so you can't just leave it. I mean, you can leave it open, but like, what's going to replace that, right? You have to replace it with love, compassion, a willingness to connect with them more, maybe, because once you clear out a lot of that shit, it creates a lot of room for, growth in that relationship. Yeah. But yeah, also I think something I wanted to hit on is like, as an individual, like, and I think we kind of hit on this before too, but like, as your own separate person, how do you break the cycle within yourself, right? Like, because you know that cycle's going on, right? Like from your parents, but how do you separate, once you've separated it from your parents, like what do you do with that? You know, like, because it's, again, but I mean, I guess we kind of, you know, it's still the same fucking thing.
Yeah, it's
right?
the same
like,
process.
It's the same process. You truly have to do the work within every moment, you know, within every little thing. I don't know, man. Like, it sounds simple, but it's really not.
No,
at all.
It's never going to be
simple. But again, if you really set yourself up in a way where it's like you're going to therapy, I recommend meditation. I know it's not for everyone. I mean, I think everyone should do it. But like, you know, that'll help you become more aware of it. But there are other things that are not strict meditation that will help you with that as well. But man, like, there's a lot of, like, even Dr. K, man, like, watching some of those videos can help people.
Yeah, because it's just like hearing about other people's experiences and like hearing stuff. It's almost like basically what he does is he just like talks to like people like on Twitch, like on stream. It's like a live like therapy session in a way. Yeah,
he's a psychiatrist who basically just talks to other streamers and people who, you know, and they just talk about life and what their struggles are, and he tries to help them, you know, in a very open, honest way.
And there's a lot, you know, I've watched a bunch of them, and there's a lot that I've been able to just like look at from a third party perspective and relate those to instances in my life and things like that. You know, there's like other ways than like a strict like meditation, like fucking go to therapy type shit. Like there's other ways that you can kind of help like move yourself along the path of
a starting step, right? I think that's all that stuff is very important. And obviously I think just trying to do generally good things for yourself, you know, worrying about your physical health, worrying about your, you know, like what you're doing with your life. Like, are you stagnant? You know, do you feel like you're moving anywhere?
Ask yourself if you're happy.
Work-wise, you know, ask yourself
like,
if you're happy. And if you're not, like, figure out why, you know, and I think a lot of these things are going to be linked to your upbringing and your parents, but not all of them.
Yeah, not all of them for sure.
A lot of the things will maybe at the source maybe from your upbringing, but it may have become its own thing through your own experience, you know, and it creates like a whole nother monster to deal with. But again, same fucking process. Same fucking process, man. Thing. Just deconstruct it. Be gentle and take your time with it. You know, it takes a lot of fucking time, but it's worth it. Once you start doing it, it feels so good.
Yeah, because you start to realize that you're like, oh, like even if it's minuscule, right? You're like, I'm making progress.
Your experience feels lighter.
Yeah,
and it's not necessarily a linear path though either. Like,
no.
You know, like there's going to be times where like you're figuring certain things out in one area of life and then you hit a roadblock and you go down a little bit and then you go back up after you figure that out. And it's like,
well, yeah, like maybe you figure things out and then you just hit a point where it's like you get shit just piling up on you and then you got to figure out all that shit. You know, it's like a job almost, right? It's like you get through this stack of paperwork.
Game, I feel like.
Yeah, like, well, I'm thinking of like you know, you get through this stack of paperwork and then your boss is like fucking, you know, like, here, your dog and grandma just died. Try to work through that.
Yeah,
like.
That's true. Well, yeah, life is just like a fucking, you know, a fucking shitty boss just handing you more bullshit over and over again. You know, like. That's kind of a good analogy, I guess, but I think that's pretty depressing to look at it that way.
Well, yeah, I wasn't. Yeah,
I like to think of it like a fucking game. Like I'm just like leveling up, and like I get stuck on a mission or a boss, and I'm like, you know, like for a little bit, but then I get through it.
All right, I'm gonna go do a side quest then.
Right, it's satisfying, you know, to think about it more like that. Even and if you don't play video games, you can think about it more like a puzzle or like more like
how do we tie this into anything besides video
games? Trying to relate. Fuck. My male alpha brain is just too small to make analogies. Shit. Oh man, but yeah, I'm just thinking, is there anything else, you know, we missed? I'm trying to think.
No, I don't know. I think we kind of touched on everything. And I was just about to say too, like, where are we at like time wise right now?
We're almost pretty much out 2 hours. So I was gonna say, like, you know, is there any closing thoughts, any things that we want to say? I think we did hit a lot of the important stuff, man. Like,
yeah, I think in like terms of like topics that we wanted to touch on, I think
a good closing thought though is like, just don't, I mean, it's cliche as fuck, but it's like, don't give up on yourself, don't give up on your parents, don't give up on anyone, right? Like, just realize that like these things are gonna take a long time, and some things will take a long time, some things won't, right? Like, you'd be surprised at how little, like, once you start to become aware and deconstruct these things, some of them will fall away a lot easier than you would expect, right? Because again, once you get sick enough of something, you will just adapt.
Yeah.
Right? You are, that's
what we said last week.
That's like a human thing, right? Like you're just going to change because you need to.
Right.
Right? If you're suffering enough, you will change, you know? And so use that to your advantage, and don't think that there's like an end point. Don't think that there's like a beginning. Just start, dude, it's like the littlest fucking things, you know? Like just within any moment, just decide to act in a way that you know, in a way that you want to be. Create yourself again and again within every moment, you know? And regardless of if it's about your parents or not, bro.
Right.
It doesn't matter. Sometimes it doesn't even matter what the source is, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes you can just disregard the source. I mean, don't disregard it, but like acknowledge the source and just work within that moment and decide what you want to do, you know? So that's all I got to say.
Yeah.
To be honest.
I mean, I think we've kind of touched on
Facts.
it. I'm like trying to think of like anything else I can say. I'm like, I don't even know.
No,
like,
I think we rounded it off pretty well, man.
Yeah.
You know, we went through our own experiences, all that. You know, this is definitely a topic though we could revisit at some point, you know?
Yeah, because I'm sure like after this, like once we're done recording, we're going to be like, oh, dude, we could have said this, or we could have said this, or fucking whatever.
That's always the fucking case, but,
you know,
again, there's no rush, there's no like, you know, feeling of like, oh, we got to talk about every little thing within 2 hours, you know?
Yeah.
Like, no, it's not even like that. But this has been good. This has been a fun one.
It has been.
You know, it's a chill thing as usual.
It's a chill thing.
You know? All right. Well,
cool.
Peace out. Signing out.
You're signing out.
Signing out. Salute to that.
Goodbye.